Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to the first part of the very first mini-series I'm doing for the podcast. It's called How Not to Plan 2025. I've been wanting to do a mini-series for a while, but I just never really had the right idea to really execute on it. And when this idea came a few days ago, I was like, oh, that's it. So I'm really excited to share this with you. Originally, I had wanted to share some thoughts about how I'm planning 2025. But then the more I sat with it, the more I realized something about that didn't sit right with me. First and foremost, I am not you. I cannot tell you how to plan 2025 because I don't know you, or maybe I do know you if we have met before, but I don't know your exact circumstances. I don't know your limitations and your obligations. I don't know the things that matter to you. I don't know your values and your dreams and your visions, etc. So for a while, as I sat with the idea of sharing my own process, I also started to realize every year my process changes ever so slightly. I am someone who is quite attuned to the way that energies move, and I've gotten to a point where I can really feel in my body how I'm responding to the energy that's present at any given moment. And so I've also learned that my process of planning sometimes takes me 2 hours. There have been years where things just came through so clearly and I just basically wrote it on a paper and I got myself a new planner, and that's the extent of my planning for the year. And there have been years where I spent months doing it, and I really love the process of being with whatever is truly organic. And in fact, to me, that's something that's deeply important. I spoke a little bit about this on episode 165, titled The Life-Changing Magic of Authentic Planning, where I spoke about how, to me, the most effective planning needs to follow our deepest desires. If we haven't done the work of really sitting with our deep desires, of really sitting with what feels natural and authentic and life-giving for us, no amount of planning is truly really going to help. In fact, I would say in that case, don't plan. Just try something out. Be experimental, play, move left, move right, and see what direction you're being pulled into. And sometimes that free-form experimentation can be more helpful than rigidly planning because, at least in my experience, after planning, sometimes all my energy is completely gone. Like, I don't really have energy anymore to spend on executing. And so that's not where we really want to end up, right? Ultimately, planning needs to serve a greater purpose. And so when I sat with my own process of planning in 2025, or for 2025, what came through were actually realizations, awarenesses, insights around how I've planned in previous years that actually didn't really serve me. And I started to notice there were quite a few patterns, and they felt very alive for me to share with you. And so hopefully, my hope is that in sharing these with you, you get to reflect more deeply on the plans that you are creating or that you have created, and perhaps make slight tweaks or adjustments to your orientation in order to help you truly serve that which is authentic, that which is rooted in true desires, rather than planning for something that ultimately will only lead you to the kind of results or the kind of success that you never really wanted in the first place, that ends up depleting you and that ends up feeling like hollow, feeling like it doesn't feed you in some shape or form. So, the first thing to not do as you're planning 2025 is don't get stuck in the waiting room. Go into the field. Don't get stuck practicing your etudes and practicing your scales. Instead, orient towards being able to play the symphony. There are a couple ways that I see the phenomenon of getting stuck in the waiting room show up in our lives. The first one is when we believe we have to go through really complex processes to just do the thing that we really love, the thing that really matters to us. So I'm going to give a concrete example. This podcast is a prime example for that. If you've been listening for a while, you know how deeply I love this podcast. You know how deeply I am committed to showing up and sharing what I know and sharing my contemplations, sharing pieces of wisdom that has shown up in my life with all of you. You know how much I love this project, which, by the way, this project is almost 3 years old, and I'm like shocked. In February, I would have been doing this podcast for 3 years. Anyways, that's beside the point. My point here is that with my podcast, I've noticed this pattern of thinking that I have to go through the motion of creating the most perfect podcast episodes. You've probably even picked up on this. I have in the past scripted myself to a T. I have spent a lot of time really refining the thoughts, really refining what I'm about to share. And I think that was really beautiful. That was a really important part of my story and my process. And as I felt into 2025, that is something that no longer feels fully aligned for me. I touched in with this desire to learn how to show up in a way that feels deeply present, in a way that prioritizes really being here rather than showing up perfectly to this podcast. And as I touched in with that part of myself, I recognized, wow, I was really scared of fumbling over my words. I was really scared of appearing stupid to people who listen to this podcast. And then I started to turn that belief or that thinking around a little bit. I started realizing, oh, if somebody thinks I'm stupid, then they should just stop listening to the podcast. The solution is really simple. Instead of me attempting to do all these acrobatics so that I don't mess up with my words and I don't appear imperfect on the podcast, what if I just start trusting my listeners to make discerned choices about whether they want to stay with the podcast or not? What if I move from the perspective of what is truly correct for me, and I trust that the right people will follow and will benefit from me showing up in the way that is correct for me in this moment? So that's one way we get stuck in the waiting room. We create complex processes just to essentially earn our inherent worthiness for doing the thing that we truly love, which actually doesn't really make sense, right? The second way that I see that I myself get stuck in the waiting room, and I see this a lot with people I work with as well, is that we get stuck in the waiting room when we create kind of these intermediary projects or goals that are, in fact, distractions from our bigger visions. So, this is not the same as the very necessary preparation and training that can lead you to be ready for your bigger vision, right? I want to really distinguish the two. What I'm talking about here is kind of this mental gymnastics that we sometimes do when we get in touch with a big vision, a vision that feels like, wow, I'm really not sure if I can pull that off, right? That kind of vision and the act of getting in touch with that kind of vision can bring a lot of fear, can bring a lot of nervousness and anxiety and feelings of being inadequate. And sometimes the way that we cope with that is we think, okay, instead of going for the big thing, I'm just going to go for the stepping stone and try it out. And if it doesn't work out, oh well, too bad, right? At least I won't be totally disappointed because I haven't really put my all into executing the big vision. Now, here's the problem with that kind of thinking. The problem with that kind of thinking is that often what is truly required for you to execute on the big visions is to move before you're ready, to start doing the thing and to allow yourself to do the thing imperfectly. To do the thing in a way that feels embarrassing, that feels cringe, that feels inadequate for you. Because in doing that, you will learn invaluable lessons about what it actually takes to steward the vision, to actually manifest the vision. And here's a little trick. Often, what is truly required of us are not the right sets of strategies. What's truly required of us is to be the person who gets to realize the big vision. Who do you need to be in order for you to steward this larger vision into life? That's often the missing piece. That's often the gap. And you don't get to close this gap by doing the intermediary thing. The intermediary thing is a nice stepping stone, it's a nice training wheel, but it's not really going to get you there. Often, what can get you there is to try, take the leap, maybe fall flat on your face, but maybe you won't. Maybe you will be led into a different direction. But to me, at the essence of going for the big vision, the essence of going for the big visions is that you let yourself try. Because in the process of trying, you start to get a lot of really valuable information about who you need to be in order to get there. So, I hope that you take some time to look at your plan, to look at your goals and your intentions, and the ways of being that you want to embrace in 2025. And I want you to ask yourself the hard question of, is this something I truly want? And if the answer is no, I want you to press on and go a little deeper and ask, if not this, then what? Often, those bigger, truer desires, those more expanded vision, inspire a little bit of fear. For me, I always get goosebumps when I touch into my true desires. And even just allowing myself to feel those initial goosebumps is such a beautiful first step to expanding one's capacity to be able to touch in with that bigger vision, right? And In doing so, you'll start expanding your capacity to share your process. This to me is also extremely important in thinking about the world we live in now. We're no longer living in a world where we're being asked to hide away from the world, create our masterpiece, and then show up one day out of the cave and show, ta-da, here's the masterpiece, right? We're no longer living in that world. We're living in a world where we are inspiring one another to see the process, to honor the inherent imperfections of that process. The reality is that creating these larger visions take a lot of different trial and error. You're not going to get it right the first time, most likely, unless you get very lucky. You're not going to. And so, can we give ourselves more grace around that process while also not shying away from the thing that feels too big, too large, too scary to go after? All right, I'm sending you all so much love. I will be back very soon with part 2.